Hey, hello everybody in the VC. It's Matt. I hope that the 20s are treating you well 4 days into the new decade and that you're enjoying it and having a good time. Wanted to carry on with the reviews of John Lennon's solo albums and doing those in order of release, just as I did for Paul, George, and Ringo. So, having got the weird experimental albums out of his system, John moves on to live performance, and we get Live Peace in Toronto 1969, which came out on December 12th of 1969 and was recorded in September of that same year. The album did okay over here. It got to number 10 in America. Strangely enough, it didn't chart in England. It's kind of odd. We'll just look at my copy first. This is my copy that I bought in 1977 or 78, somewhere around there. Only copy I've ever had. I remember that I got this at Sound Warehouse on Berry Street in Fort Worth. So there's the cover. Kind of not the greatest cover, but an alright cover. Kind of interesting. Minimalist cover of a cloud in the sky. And, most live albums have a picture of the band on stage or something like that. So kind of interesting that they threw a little bit of a curveball and went with something else. And here is the back, which has the title of the album, song listing, who plays on the album. My copy is an import, Germany, I believe, but don't quote me on that because I'm not 100%. It may be British. Here is the records on the Apple label. Early copies, or the first pressing, I believe, of this came with a calendar for 1970. My copy, unfortunately, didn't, so I've never had one with the calendar. I've seen them, but I've never actually had one. Anyway, the Toronto Festival in 1969, festivals were all the rage. Woodstock and Altamont, Watkins Glen, Monterey a few years before that, all that good stuff. So the organizers in Canada decided to put together a music festival with a decided bent and focus towards the stars of the previous decade, a lot of 50s stars. So at this festival, you got Bo Diddley and Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Gene Vincent. They also wanted to get more, at that time, current performers. So in addition to John Lennon, they also got Alice Cooper, Chicago, and the Doors. So it sounds like a pretty good lineup. Would have been a neat show to see, I would imagine. Anyway, John's participation in this is a bit of a happy accident. The performers, the producers of the festival, that is, got hold of John, hoping that he would serve as MC for the concert, never dreaming that he would actually want to perform because he was still in the Beatles at this time. And John said, well, if I'm going to come all the way over to Canada, why not just get a band and perform as well? 1969, you get a chance to get a Beatle at your festival, you're going to jump at it, and that's exactly what they did. So it's one of John's very few live performances outside of the Beatles, which is a bit of a surprise. He is the one who performed live least of the four, which is also somewhat of a surprise. You would have thought that given his penchant for spectacle and performance art and staging happenings and events, that he would have performed live more than he did. And then again, it may not be that surprising, given that when you get into the 70s and he's in America, and with his immigration battle, live performances, at least until 76 or so, may not have been practicable or logistically possible. But it's a shame that he never got to undertake a tour the way the other three did, or even that he never got to do more live shows. So I did a rough count in my head, and I may be missing a show or two, but I think he only performed live outside of the Beatles 5 or 6 times, I guess. You have the Cambridge university deal that's on Life with the Lines. You have this. You have the one-on-one concert or the UNICEF concert. I'm not sure if that's the same thing or separate things. You have his live performance with Frank Zappa and the Mothers that's on the Sometime in New York City album. And then there's the his appearance on stage with Elton John in 1974, which was just to do 2 or 3 songs, so that wasn't a full show. The other unfortunate aspect of this is that all of his live performances are either so-so or downright lousy. Certainly the Zappa stuff and the Cambridge University are just nearly unlistenable. And then you have some of these other things which are just all right. And I think the reason behind that might be that most or maybe all of these concerts, I'm not sure about one-on-one, stem from events that just sort of came up, and John agreed to appear live and had very little time to get a band together and rehearse or work out a song list, and so he kind of just had to fly by the seat of his pants on many of these appearances, live appearances, unfortunately. And so it's just a real shame that he didn't have the opportunity to do that, to do a tour or at least some one-off concerts where he had a couple of 2 or 3 months notice that this was coming up, and would have had the time to work up a set list and rehearse and so forth. And it shows on this that this band, a particular band of performers, is just sort of last minute thrown together. It's not necessarily a bad thing always on this album, but it does show that they're not very rehearsed, because they only had a couple of days notice before this show. They only got a chance to rehearse on the plane ride over from England to Canada. Maybe they got to rehearse a little bit before they went on stage, but I do remember in 1980 Double Fantasy comes out, and I was hoping and thinking that, wow, maybe this album do well and maybe John will do a tour. I was excited about the possibility because I'd never seen a Beatle live at that point. Wouldn't see one until I saw Paul and Ringo in 1989, and that never happened. Obviously, we know what sadly and tragically occurred right after Double Fantasy came out. I don't know whether John was planning to or thinking about doing a tour or not. I don't remember ever hearing anything about that in the interviews I read with him before he died, and I don't remember anyone really saying anything about that in the years immediately preceding 1980. Now, on some of the podcasts and stuff in recent years, I have heard people say that he was putting together a tour or planning a tour. How true that is or not, that may just be wishful thinking decades after the fact, or maybe that's what the case was. Who knows? I don't. Anyway, so it's just a shame of what could have been that he didn't get a chance to do a properly planned out live concert or tour. So he put the band together pretty quick. You've got John and Yoko, of course. You have Klaus Voormann playing bass guitar, longtime Beatles fan, Beatles friend. Probably was a fan too, I guess. Alan White plays drums, who of course went on to play for Yes. And then you got old Clapper, the Yardbirds' least interesting guitarist, Eric Clapton on guitar, who actually does a pretty good job here, though. The album opens with John saying, we've never played together before, so we're only going to do songs that we know. They open, so you get a lot of, several covers, and then you get a couple of John songs, a couple of Beatles songs that are covers with one exception. Anyway, album opens with Blue Suede Shoes, the old 50s song. Fitting because of the other 50s, because of the 50s stars that are on the bill of the same concert, I guess. John's in pretty good voice. It's a good cover version. I've never been a huge fan of live albums. I guess I should qualify, with a few exceptions. There's a few that I really like, but by and large I prefer studio over live. And I've never been a fan of cover versions for the most part, with a few exceptions of some of the covers that the Beatles did as well or better than the people who originally did them. And there's a few others that the Rolling Stones and some people did. But the Blue Suede Shoes, John's in good voice. It's a pretty good cover. The band, they sound like a good bar band. Uh, you know, it's okay. Not a bad cover. It's not a great album opener, but not a terrible one either. I'll give Blue Suede Shoes a 6. Next, we have Money, which, of course, the Beatles did. One of my favorite Beatles songs. It's a cover version. I love the Beatles version best. Right after that, I love the original, the Barrett Strong version on Motown, which I think Barrett Strong and Berry Gordy wrote. I believe that was the first hit Motown had. Love both of those versions. This one isn't as good as the Beatles or the Motown version. The music on here is a little bit plodding, but it's also got a slight edge of menace and some down and dirty to it, so that elevates it some. It's a loose and shambling version. I like it. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7 again. It's nowhere close to the Beatles version or the Motown version. Probably even like the Flying Lizards version as much maybe as this, but this is a pretty good one. I'll give it a 7. Next we go into Dizzy Miss Lizzy, another song that the Beatles covered on Beatles for Sale, if I'm not mistaken, or was that Help? Maybe it's Help. Anyway, never was crazy about the song to begin with. It's not one of my favorite Beatles songs, being a cover. Larry Williams did it originally, I believe. Not even crazy about his version. It's just sort of that just over and over, drives you a little nuts. It, not a don't hate the song, but just never was that crazy about it. And one reason, by the time the Beatles did Dizzy Miss Lizzy, I think they had grown beyond the need or the point to have to do covers. I think they only did some of those later covers on Beatles for Sale and Help, just because they were so busy and being run into the ground with just constant recording and touring and radio and personal appearances that they just grabbed an old cover to fill in when they needed, we've got the album done, but we still need 3 more songs, and they just were just dead tired and didn't have the time to come up with original songs, and they just had to have albums out and singles out so quick in 63, 64, 65, that I think they really had a lot of energy and originality to their covers early on in 63 and 64, but when you get around to 65, I think the covers that they did for the most part, Honey Don't and Dizzy Miss Lizzy and some of those, sound pretty tired, and I think they just just did them to fill space on an album more than they were actually excited about them. You compare those covers of 65 to the covers of like Please Mr. Postman and You Really Gotta Hold On Me and Money, which are just among some of my favorite Beatle performances. Anyway, but that's the Beatles. The version here is actually maybe the most energetic song so far on the album. It is the performance is kind of just by the seat of its pants, thrown together and barely hanging on, but it gets the job done. And I'm going to give Dizzy Miss Lizzy, just because I'm not that crazy about the song, I'm going to give it a 5.5, but the performance here is actually pretty good. About this time in the album, you kind of realize 3 songs in that were this just some band of people you didn't know who recorded this live performance and you heard it, you probably wouldn't care about it too much. But the only reason we really do care about it is that John Lennon is part of the proceedings here. So yeah, 5.5 for Dizzy Miss Lizzy. Next, we get the first Beatles original, which is Your Blues from the White Album. It's kind of a sluggish take on it compared to the studio version. And again, you get it's not bad. I mean, I like it all right. I'm going to give it a 7. But it's just again, you're like, if only they had more time to practice this and work it up. Of course, Clapton and Lennon had done this at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, for the film of that, but so they were somewhat familiar with doing it live, but that would have been the year before, and it's just a shame that they didn't have time to practice this and work it up. They could have done a better job at it, I think, than the one they do here. But the one they do here, it's okay. So the next one up is Cold Turkey, which was Lennon's third solo single release. I believe it was third. I think it was Instant Karma, Give Peace a Chance, and Cold Turkey. And I think this might have been the debut of Cold Turkey. I don't know if this came out. No, I think the single was probably out by the time this performance. But the version here is different from the single version, the studio version. A little more pedestrian than the studio version. It lacks the acidity and the bite of the studio version. The guitar playing's pretty good, but she who has been silent so far, all of a sudden, oh no, here comes the Yoko with her screeching vocal inanities all over this song, which mar the proceedings quite a bit. The version, I would give it a 7.2, just because there's a bit of a different guitar riff on it that's interesting. I don't like it as much as I do the studio version, but it's interesting in its own right. The Yoko presence is very distracting, to say the least, but the musicianship and John's performance sort of saved the day, and I'll give it a 7.2, even though, as I've already said a couple of times, I like the studio version better. Side 1 ends with Give Peace a Chance, which I actually like. Maybe the highlight here of this album for me. I actually like this version more than I do the studio version, and I'll discuss the studio version when we get to Shaved Fish, but this one is just more energetic, swings more than the studio version, and just more energy and power to it. I do love the John saying, I've forgotten all the bits in between, I just know the chorus, and he's singing, one of the in-between bits where everybody's talking about John and Yoko, Timothy Leary, and someone, and all we were saying. So that's kind of funny. I always get a chuckle out of his introduction to the song, shouting something in German. I guess it's German, and so that's kind of fun. It's a fun version. I'll give it a 7.6. Then, sadly and unfortunately, this was not a one-sided album, and we have to turn the album over and go to side 2, which is a Yoko Ono showcase, her chance to shine. Yeah. So we get 2 Yoko masterpieces on side 2. First one is Don't Worry, Kyoko. Mummy's only looking for her sanity in the snow. Mummy's only looking for her hand in the snow. The song starts her singing Don't Worry, pretty much straight ahead. Gives you a little hope that she's going to actually try to just sing normally. That only lasts a few seconds, and then here comes the wailing banshee and making all these wacky sounds that I don't know how to describe them. Sounds like a howler monkey got his nuts stuck in a rat trap or something. Just unbearable to sit through. Song only lasts about 4 minutes and 40 seconds, which is about 6 minutes too long, but at least it's fairly short. The guitar playing on this is all right for just like if you're just listening to a band doing a jam session and just playing. So the singing is unbearable. So instead of giving this a 0, it's not good enough to get a 1. I'll give it a 0.5 just for the guitar playing, which is somewhat interesting. If it was an instrumental, it might rate a 0.5, in other words, is what I'm saying. And sadly, it's not an instrumental. And then we get a 12-minute magnum opus from Oh No called John John, Let's Hope for Peace, which is just, to get through that, it just takes sheer willpower and you wish you were deaf. So John John gets a 10 from me. That is a negative 10. Um, I've had this album, like I said, for 40 some years, and think I've only played side 2, and this might be like maybe the 3rd or 4th time. It's terrible on side 2 and totally disposable. So there it is. That's maybe John's best live performance outside of the Beatles, which is unfortunate because overall I would give this album a 6, I guess. It's in all the years I've had it, it's not an album that I play very often. When I do play it, it's just okay. Uh, and it's really sad again. You just kind of think of what could have been if he would have had a chance to do a live concert with a band where he would have had time to work up a song list and practice, because you could have had, for example, you've got Your Blues on here, which I like the song, but it's probably my least favorite John song on the White Album. But just imagine the possibility if you could have had time to work up Dear Prudence or Cry Baby Cry, Sexy Sadie, Don't Let Me Down, Come Together, even some of the maybe some of the Revolver songs or something like that. I mean, I don't know that they could have done Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour stuff on stage at this point in the time, but just so much possibility of what could have been, and but we get this, and it's okay at best. It's nothing to get too excited over. It's not a bad little album, but it's not really great. And everyone plays pretty well, but again, they didn't have a chance to rehearse, so it's all sort of ramshackle and loose, and by the seat of the pants. Works sometimes it just kind of shambles or rambles along. You do get Clapton here while he's still a halfway interesting guitar player. He's always been a good guitar player, but after Cream and a couple of 2 or 3 songs on the Layla album, he became the most boring guitar player probably in the history of the world, and never did anything worth listening to again. But he did do some interesting stuff with the Blues Breakers and Cream and I guess the Yardbirds, even though he was by far the least interesting of the 3 guitars players they had. But pretty much after 1970 or so, he never really did anything worth listening to. So you still get him when he's halfway interesting. John's in pretty good voice throughout. Yoko is in terrible voice throughout. Sadly, she did not come down with laryngitis on the flight over. It's okay, but then that's that with the live piece in Toronto, and now we finally get into John's solo albums proper, and those will be coming up.